right. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
We're continuing the Chassidic Rebbes Naaseh. We have to pick up the pace. We have so many mamarim to do, so little time in this on this earth to do it in. We have been discussing the order of the day, because the order of the day and the different prayers of the day are how we make the home within our hearts for the holy man, also known as the spirit of purity, the direct knowledge of godliness that every soul has. We make a home for it and give it a dwelling place in our hearts through the daily prayer, through davening. Now, we started by saying the first thing is the reckoning on your bed at night. Right? The first thing is to prepare for the morning's work. You have to think about the previous day and how it wasn't as godly as it should have been. And then you decide that tomorrow is going to be Gar Andrish, Morgen Vetza and Gar Andrish. Tomorrow is going to be completely different. And then you wake up, and because you made that decision last night, your animal soul is in a position where it's a little bit more refined, and it's able to give a haidah, an acknowledgement of God. The first haidah, the Meda Ani, which recognizes God's existence in the general sense. And then you continue in the Siddur, you continue with the order of the morning, all of which is part of Shacharis. And you reach the general Heidah when you say Heidu. Heidu la Hashem kiru b'shmai. And then you continue. And what are you doing through all of this? You switch at the Heidu la Hashem kiru b'shmai to Shevach, not just Heidah, but also Shevach, not just acknowledgement, but also praise. Why? Because by the time you have already made these acknowledgements with the animal soul, it is ready to understand godliness. So you have acknowledgements, which an acknowledgement is, I agree to this thing even though I don't understand it, right? Our metaphor is like someone who sees something and sees it with his own eyes and knows that it's real even though he doesn't understand it at all, right? Once we've acknowledged it, and we have that Kabbalah's that acceptance of the yoke, that faith has permeated the animal soul a little bit, it's ready to begin understanding godliness. And we said, the last thing we discussed is that this is how Psukei de Zimra works. That's what the verses of praise that we say from Baruch She'amar until Yishtabach in the Siddur are. They are thinking about the way that everything that the animal soul sees and appreciates actually is in praise of Hashem and is bottled to Hashem. Everything that the animal soul knows itself serves God, right? So we don't start, as we explained last week, telling the animal soul, you have to give up everything that you love and you have to love Hashem instead, because that doesn't work. Can't tell the animal soul that. Can't tell anyone that about any kind of love, really. It's not how it works. What we do instead is we take the animal soul and we say, after, of course, it is already a little bit open to the idea of godliness, which is the Heidas, the acknowledgements that we do, Medani and then Heidu. And then we take the animal soul and we say, look at all of these things that you already appreciate, right? The snow and the mountains and the rivers and the beauty of the world. And we say that all of that beauty and all of these various different things that you appreciate, right? Your parnasa, as we say in Ashrei, right? Your own livelihood, how beautiful it is to have food and to be sustained and to have life. All of these things that the animal soul with its own mind can appreciate quite well. We begin to explain to the animal soul that all of these things, what are they? Where do they come from? What is their very existence? It is in service of Hashem, glorifying Hashem, right? As we say in Pirkei Avos, God doesn't create anything except for His glory, right? Everything that we exist, everything we know and love already is really just an expression of godliness, right? It's not just that God is greater than all of the things that we already appreciate. It's not just that God is more delicious than a piece of steak, to speak coarsely, although it could speak more coarsely, but we'll leave it there. It's not just that God is more delicious than a steak, so to speak. It's that the steak, which I already know to be delicious, that deliciousness, in fact, reflects God, right? It's not just that God is more than the creation, because the animal soul, the whole problem is, of course, we didn't get into this at such length last week, so I'll say it now. The whole problem is that the animal soul doesn't... You have to have a certain maturity and a certain wisdom and a certain far-sightedness to appreciate that the goodness of God is greater and better than the goodness of the thing that is in front of you right now, right? You can't just leap to that, because if you say, really, God is better than the steak, right? This is like old time, it's really not that old, but this is like shallow religion, let's put it that way. L'chaim.
Amen.
This is like shallow religion, right? This is like what's it called? Willpower. There's a better word. Delayed gratitude, right? This is like delayed gratitude. It's saying, don't have this thing that you like. Have God instead, because at some point or in some way you will appreciate that God is really greater, right? And normally religious people say the afterlife, right? In the afterlife you'll really appreciate that God is greater, right? And the problem is that this line doesn't work. It doesn't work on adults anyway. On children it might work. But on adults, generally speaking, especially nowadays, this doesn't work. Because the adult animal soul, which is very smart, right, is also very short-sighted. The animal soul ultimately wants the proof now. In other words, if God is so good, show me now how God is better. Otherwise, why should I care about some thing, maybe, possibly, I've never seen such a thing, I don't know, all the doubts. It's a master at causing doubt within a person, the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination, etc., becomes really an unconvincing argument. So instead, what the Chazal, what the sages did in their infinite wisdom, is they established the prayer not like that at all. We don't talk about God is so... The first thing we talk about, at least, is not God is so great, He's so much greater, He's so much better, I should forsake everything of this world, everything that I appreciate for God. Our first thing that we say when the animal soul is just awake enough and just tuned into God enough, just after those initial acknowledgments, which again, acknowledgement means without understanding, just those initial acceptances, even from a distance, we begin to talk about it and talk about the things that it already naturally loves. We talk to it about beauty and life and all of the things that we naturally in a biological life, in an animal life, appreciate, right? And we explain how each of those things, where does their goodness come from? What is the essence of this thing I already love? The essence of this thing is godliness. It is an appreciation for Hashem, an appreciation for its creator. So we go from within the things that we already love to Hashem, as the Siddur explains. Now the truth is that it's not really just about delayed gratitude, because that's a very shallow reading of what could possibly happen. There's really a deeper reason as well why we do this, because you're not really set up to appreciate God in truth. In other words, God in His true greatness, if you don't include the world in God's unity, which is a separate issue, right? There's deeper theological issues. You're not going to be able to bring the animal soul later to the greatest appreciation of God if you don't first explain how everything in the world is also one with God, right? Because there's a concept called Achdus Hashem, the unity of God, which we're going to talk about later when we talk about Shema. We haven't got to the Shema yet. We're still in Pesukei de Zimra. And when we get there, we'll see that this was a very necessary part of the preparation. All right, continuing in the Chassidic Rebbes Naaseh, page Kuf Samach Vav at the top. That is the second side of the second sheet of this handout, right near the top. Kuf Samach Vav. The Chassidic Rebbe, we actually stopped kind of in the middle of a sentence, but it was a good place to stop. We were explaining how the appreciation of godliness is invested in human intellect until the extent that even the animal soul can appreciate it. Basically, this idea I've just been telling you. And the Chassidic Rebbe continues. He says, "Amnam liyos hanefesh habahamis ikarei midos v'kol chefte v'ritzonu dvarim hagashmiyim umutva behem." But since the animal soul is mainly midos, which means it's mainly emotion. Now, this is an interesting point. which we're going to sort of return to again in this mimer. The animal soul is primarily emotional. Now, don't get the wrong impression, because the animal soul, as we always say in this class, is also very smart, very intelligent. However, why is the animal soul mainly emotion? Because in the animal soul, the emotions drive the intellect, rather than vice versa, right? I had a Rosh Yeshiva once said that Me'ach Lev Kaved, which means head, heart, liver, which in Kabbalah means mind, emotions, action, is the correct order. And the Rosh Tevas of that is Melech. If it goes mind, then heart, then action, you're a king, right? But if it goes Lev, Moach, Kaved, if it goes heart, mind, head, you're a Lemech.
Oh, Klum.
Yeah. If completely reversed, yeah. You're a Lemech or you're Klum. Exactly, very good, I like it. You have to get it in the right order. The animal soul, the emotions are the primary driver. What does the mind serve to do for the animal soul? To reinforce its being is really the answer. Why does the biological animal have a mind? In fact, this idea is so true that even the scientists have chapped it, which is quite a chiddush, because there's so many true things that the scientists haven't yet discovered. But this they have already discovered. If you ask the average biologist on the street, why does a human being have intellect? He would tell you, because the intellect was extremely functional in the perpetuation of the species. Right? Self-preservation. That is why an animal has a mind. And every function that the animal has, self-preservation is still really, so the scientists still didn't really get it, because self-preservation is still a very coarse way of putting this idea. It's more of an existential idea, as I always say. It's more of an ordering, a centering of one's existence in oneself, in one's finite being. Which I know sounds very abstract and airy-fairy, but the idea is that in the animal soul, everything that it has serves itself. Everything that it has serves its own benefit, and not in the really, really coarse ways that you might imagine. Even the subtlest in the animal soul thinks mathematics, abstract mathematics, right? Not something that has a direct application. Even when it does that, it's still serving the animal soul's self. Why? It's emotions. Why is emotion? Well, maybe we should take a step back. I skipped a step. Why are the emotions an expression of this self-centeredness? Right? Because the emotions are the level of a person, of a soul.
It's about you.
Where the souls relate, it's the place where the soul sees everything in relation to itself, right? Intellect, the fundamental difference, we're going to discuss this at length, the fundamental difference between intellect and emotions is that intellect can think objectively. Emotions, everything is relative to myself. It is either drawn towards something, ahava, or repulsed by something, moving away from something, which is yira, love and fear, and all the other emotions are connected with this notion. It's how do I exist, my finite self, in relation to other things.
Intellect could be for the long run, while emotions are for now.
That's also true, although I again think that's an oversimplification, just like I was saying before. Chassidus doesn't really talk about, I think, that very much, because that's an oversimplification, although true. Generally speaking, that's correct. So when we say that the animal soul is primarily an emotional being, right? If you read Tanya, it says the Jew has two souls. He has a godly soul and an animal soul. Both of them, or each of them, has 10 faculties, 3 intellectual and 6 or 7 emotive, however you want to.
Last time I think we spoke about 4 souls.
Don't get distracted. I'm a simple Jew. Unlike some people, I can only understand the Tanya. I'm too simple. Tonight I'm too simple for 4 souls. The godly soul and the animal soul. They each have a mind and emotions. Mm-hmm. But if you learn Tanya, what you'll find out is that where the emphasis is, what the essence of the soul is different. The essence of the animal soul is emotive. In other words, the driving factor beneath all things, the deepest driving factor, is my relationship with other things, right? Such that even its intellect, even its mind, only exists at the end of the day for that purpose. You want to hear a story the Rebbe told? L'chaim. The Rebbe said a story once illustrating this very thing, maybe even a couple of times, at least once. Aristotle, heard of him?
A little bit.
Greatest philosopher in history. When the medieval Jewish sages say chacham, say a wise person, and they don't specify who, they mean Aristotle. Maimonides said Aristotle was the he had an intellect bordering on prophecy. Great Jews respect Aristotle very much. The Rebbe tells the following story about Aristotle. That is how the Rebbe, by the way, prefaced this story about Aristotle. That's not my preface, that's actually the Rebbe's preface to the story. So the Rebbe says, Aristotle was once teaching a class on ethics. I don't know if you know, but Aristotle's philosophy was not what today we call philosophy. Back then, philosophy meant every type of wisdom. So when we say Aristotle was a philosopher, we mean not just in medicine, not just in metaphysics. He wasn't just talking about God. He studied everything. He was a scientist. He examined clam biology, made very interesting observations. In fact, I read recently that some of his observations of marine life, which people thought were incorrect, they actually discovered substrains of species that they were actually correct. They actually recently scientifically confirmed some things that Aristotle wrote about marine life. He was very involved in all of the sciences. So one of the things he was involved in, one area of philosophy, was ethics. He taught how to be a good person, right? The fundamental point of Aristotle's philosophy was the intellect. Everything is about, really in all of Greek philosophy, not just Aristotle, most Greek philosophy, Plato, Socrates, all of them, the essence of ethics is intellect. The way you're supposed to order your life is so that the correct way to live is the way where you are best able to understand the world and ultimately the things which are beyond the world, metaphysics, godliness, etc., right? So the essence of his whole philosophy was intellect. So, in order to preserve your intellect, you have to live a certain life, right? For example, if a person accepts bribes, to take a random example, right? Then if the person accepts bribes, what that means is his judgment is not true. His judgment is not straight. It impedes his intellect, right? So it's contrary to the idea of intellect, contrary to the highest function of a person, which is the mind, to take bribes. It ruins the intellect, and so on and so on. So he was giving a course on ethics. And that day, the Rebbe said, he was explaining one of the worst things a person can do. The Rebbe doesn't say what it was, right? Think of something that it would be really embarrassing to get caught doing. Something like that, right? How do I know that's the type of thing he was talking about? Stick around for a moment. So he was giving a whole class about this thing, which is one of the worst things a person can do, and how it's beneath human dignity. It's a davar maguna, is how they wrote it in Teres Menachem. I'm not sure what the Yiddish word was. He was doing something embarrassing, a lowly thing. He was explaining how the lowly thing is this is one of the worst things a person can do. Later, that day or that week or whenever it was, Aristotle's students caught Aristotle doing exactly this thing, right? This thing. And Aristotle's students asked him, "Hayitachen, how can it be? You sit there and give us your whole class on ethics, and the truth is, Aristotle probably meant everything that he said. I assume he wasn't just a hypocrite putting on a nice show. I assume, based on his reputation and the quality of his philosophy, that he actually meant what he said. But his students said, "How can you be doing this very thing which you told a hypocrite?" Aristotle told them, "When I was teaching the class, I was Aristotle. Now I'm not Aristotle. When I was teaching the class, I was Aristotle. But now that you've caught me, I'm not Aristotle." You cannot find a more Chabad story than this story. This story that the Rebbe told encapsulates the whole approach of Chassidus to the intellect. Right? It's exactly what we're saying here. Aristotle, when was he Aristotle, right? He defined the person as an intellectual being. When he was giving his class and thinking his thoughts on philosophy, that philosophy dominated him. He was a good person. He would never have done these embarrassing things. Later, when his students caught him, he wasn't engaged in intellect. He wasn't engaged in that pursuit. He disengaged from his intellect, right? And he was no longer Aristotle, and he was open to doing whatever his biological needs told him. In the words of the Chassidic Rebbes, that is because ikarei midos, the main thing of the animal soul, even the animal soul who is a great philosopher, is midos. Right? What does that mean? It means that the intellect, the animal soul, only lets you do philosophy, ethics, all of these high-minded ideas, right? If it furthers its own midos-based goals, its own emotive goals. If your mind allows it to get closer to the things it wants to get close to and further away from the things it wants to get further away from, then it will sanction your intellect, it will rubber stamp your intellect, and you'll be allowed to become a great philosopher, right? But the thing is, are you ever really a philosopher to the animal soul? The answer is no. Really, biological life comes first. The emotions, the way that the person is situated in relation to other things is more profound and deeper in the person than their intellect. This is the animal soul. So that's what we mean when we say the animal soul is ikarei midos. Its main aspect is emotive. The godly soul, on the other hand, its main part is intellect. Even though it has emotions, those emotions only exist to serve its intellect. A totally different type of soul, a different type of being.
It's a very problematic example.
Why?
Because the whole idea is that the intellect should actually control the emotion. If the emotion are different, what do you call it, like, different thing, then, I mean, one can be good and one can be bad. The only thing, we are united. It's not like you can divide yourself to two. Only sick people can do that.
Who? What do you mean?
I mean, if somebody's having a schizophrenic, I mean, he can say, okay, I'm good now. In a minute, I'm going to be bad. So this is my animal soul and this is my godly soul. I can do both. But once you're one person, you need to watch yourself and
I'm not sure I follow.
No, I mean, you were saying that when he spoke, he was the Aristo.
Yeah.
And then when he didn't, I mean, he did something else. I mean, it was.
That was his excuse. Obviously, it doesn't work.
This is a good example for Chabad.
But what's Chabad about it? Let me clarify. What's Chabad about it is that what the Rebbe was illustrating with the story is that seichel is not enough. Intellect is a very nice thing. On its own, it's not enough. On its own, intellect is insufficient.
Unfortunately.
What?
Unfortunately.
Well, fortunately, the way God made the world. I don't know what to say. What you mean? Because his point is that who is the person, right? Who is Aristotle, right? The very fact that Aristotle can so believe that this is the wrong thing to do and then do it, right? What does that indicate? What that indicates is that Aristotle's intellectual philosophy is not the essence of Aristotle. That's really what's Chabad about this story. What's Chabad about this story is that Aristotle was trying to say that the essence of the person is his intellect and that he should be ordered according to his intellect. However, the truth is that even Aristotle admitted in this story is that there is a gap, there's a break between a person's biological intellect, the intellect of the Nefesh HaBahamis, and who the person is, right? You don't have to think. That's the problem. That's really the essence of the problem. You're not compelled to think. A human being is not compelled to be a thinking being, right? Think about it. The natural state of the biological being is not a thinking state. The natural state of the biological being is a feeling state. Thinking is something that you do, not something that you are. preservation state, or
only thought
I would call it
relation.
I would say relation state, right? There's no all objective and abstract thought in the biological being, right, is something that we do, not something that we are. And because it's something that we do, we can stop doing it, right? As Aristotle did. The whole thing is that that's why Aristotle said, when I'm not thinking, I'm not Aristotle, because he tried to define intellect as what the human being is, right? So by that definition, when he was teaching his class, he was Aristotle. When he wasn't teaching his class, he wasn't Aristotle. It's actually a story mocking Aristotle's conception of the deepest nature of the human being, is really what it is, right?
So how can you define this?
The Rebbe is doing that not to say that the biology of the human being is primary, God forbid, to say that the animal soul is all the human being is. The Rebbe is saying that this conception of the human being as a being of pure wisdom was misled. There are deeper things afoot in the human soul. Right? As Chassidus would tell us, ikare midos, the essence of the animal soul, what drives everything else that it does and colors everything else that it does, is its existence, its midos, its relation to other finite beings. And what does the animal soul want? Is physical things and things that are natural to it, things that it naturally pursues, right? Which is not to say that the animal soul cannot be educated. In fact, that's what this entire mimer is all about. But that's not its natural desire, right? This is why we are trying to seek a fusion between the godly soul and the animal soul. We are trying to use the godly soul to educate the animal soul, right? This answers, by the way, a common sense question about the Tanya, right? A common sense question about Tanya's spiritual taxonomy of the human being, right? The different forces at work within the human soul, right? Or souls, however many you want, 4 souls. The 3 souls, 4 souls, 2 souls. The forces at work, right? If the animal soul has a mind, why do we need the godly soul to speak to it? We should be able to speak to the animal soul directly. The animal soul is not a dumb animal. It's a human animal, right? A human animal I can speak to. I can speak to an animal soul. I could teach it philosophy. I could teach it math. I could teach it ethics, right? Why is Chassidus so obsessed with it's like an odd couple, right? We're trying to make a shidduch between the godly soul, wants nothing to do with anything physical, anything of this earth, obsessed with God, right? And you want him to speak to the animal soul, totally physical, totally emotional, all into its own self-preservation. Why do you want to bridge this infinite gap? We should just speak to the animal soul, teach the animal soul ethics, tell it what the right life to live is, educate it from when it's a child so that good living is second nature. No. Done, right?
Cannot be done.
That's exactly correct. It can't be done. Why can't it be done?
Because each one of them is like black and white. I mean, each one tries to influence the other.
Because the intellect of the edible soul is coarse and only meant to serve the...
Exactly, because no matter what ethics you teach to the animal soul takes whatever you teach it and makes it about itself. It only understands things in one mode. Mm-hmm. The animal soul can never be entirely selfless and entirely God-centric, which is one of the first things the Alter Rebbe teaches you in Tanya. Chapter 1 and chapter 2 of Tanya. It doesn't get more basic than that, right? The reason you cannot teach the animal soul these lessons directly, why you need to bring a godly soul to bear on the animal soul, is because the animal soul will only ever, and it can reach quite high levels of refinement. It can reach certain levels of what we would call selflessness, but ultimately, what is all that selflessness grounded in? Only in itself. You cannot live a God-centric life in the truest sense of the term, truly God-centric, a truly metaphysically God-centric life with just the animal soul, no matter how smart it is, because all of those smarts are grounded in its existential finite self. Let's continue. It says the... Yeah, sure.
It seems like the godly soul has to be on automatic pilot.
Why do you say that?
Because it's fundamentally selfless.
Right.
And it's not looking for anything.
Right. It's looking for more godliness is what it's looking for.
Right. Well, but even then, that would imply that there's some level of satisfaction derived from achieving godliness. And I don't think that that's really what I don't know, but I think what it seems like the godly soul is just doing it for the sake of doing it. That's what Ronnie described as the actions of the 4-year-old. That's how you conduct yourself.
Yeah.
So you do it because you're told to do it, and you don't necessarily expect a reward. You just do it.
No, the doing it is the reward for the highest level of the
but
godly
there's
soul.
But there's no rush from that. If there's a rush from it, then there's an element of the godly soul, of the animal soul, and the godly soul. If you get any self with rush.
In some fundamental way, I absolutely agree with you. There's different levels. The godly soul is also complex. It's not simple. But I do agree with you that at the most fundamental level, if you learn the deeper Maimarim of Chassidus, for example, if you learn the Rebbe Rashab Samech Vav, the way he describes the deepest levels of the godly soul is almost as a force of nature. The godly soul is drawn towards God almost like a magnet is drawn.
But even then,
it's a natural motion. It's not a conscious, and in fact, you're 100% right. It even discusses there the difference between felt pleasure and unfelt pleasure. And felt pleasure is a lower level. The perception of loving God with delight, what's called the Ava B'Tanugim, which is the great pleasure in God that only tzaddikim feel, who have totally slain their animal soul. Even such people, even that love of delight is not the highest possibility for the godly soul. Because anything which can be consciously experienced, experience per se denotes that you have not grasped the essence, because God is not an experienceable thing. So I think you have arrived at a very deep conclusion, and it's actually connected with the two opposing teachings about the times of Mashiach, which this is just a teaser of an idea, but there's two opposing teachings about the times of Mashiach. One says that when Mashiach comes, it's going to be feasting all day long, right? You're going to eat the Leviathan and the ox, and you're going to drink
the other one is we're going to be fasting.
You're going to drink the yayin. You're going to drink the.
That's the other.
You're going to drink the yayin hameshumar, the wine that's been preserved, that's been since the Garden of Eden, right? And the other view of Mashiach says it's going to be a time of fasting. You didn't want to hear that.
Much better. Imagine everybody's going to be.
And the truth is that the fasting one is the higher and the deeper conception, and these are two states of Mashiach's coming. But that's a whole discussion for a different time.
Mashiach coming will be able to do both at the same time.
With both sides of your mouth.
Yes.
It is in den vertrunken bederich pshitus. Sorry, questions? No?
Nah, I just said you couldn't be physical.
That's a goal, to be able to feast and fast.
Yeah. You need to fast face.
The animal soul is in dem vertrunken bederich pshitus.
Huh?
The animal soul is steeped in physicality. Bederich pshitus. As the rabbi would translate that as it's the default setting. The default setting of the animal soul is that it is steeped in physicality. Fartrunken, shruya, kilo, sharui. Ubergilus gedela shehu ragil rak bezeh. And with great habit, with great habituation, that it's habituated, its habit is only in this thing. It is held by and connected to all worldly matters. And therefore, the worship of Psuke de Zimra is lezamer aritzim. This is a Chassidic play on words, repeated in many Maimarim. Psuke de Zimra means verses, like Psukim means verses. De Zimra normally translated praise, song, right? Psuke de Zimra. But Zimra has another root, which is lezamer aritzim. Lezamer means to cut down evil, right? So Psuke de Zimra are not just verses of praise, verses of song, they're verses of cutting down, of chopping. Why are they called this? Because these verses that we say in the morning are to separate evil from the animal soul, and to drag it out from the muck. Well, better translate as muck, right? From the goo, the slime, and the clay. Okay, so that's, well, 1 second. We'll pause there for a second. So that is what you're doing during Psuke de Zimra. You're cutting down. You're essentially taking, because what does it mean to separate the evil from the animal soul? We're taking the things, again, that the animal soul already loves. Oh, look how beautiful that mountain is, right? The animal soul has an appreciation. We're taking something the animal soul has an appreciation of, and we're saying, you thought this was all about you. Really, it's about God. That's the chopping. That's the chopping down, right? You're teaching. You're using the godly soul to teach the animal soul that all these things which it thought were about it are really about God. So now he says a metaphor, a very interesting metaphor, which is also repeated in Chassidus. It is like gel me eitz shetzrichim lasais mimena kli. It is like a big piece of wood from which you want to make a vessel. Let's say a cup, for our example. We like using the cup as the metaphor. Hine ha gol mi kameshahu efshar lasais mimena kli. Something which is just a block, something that is simple, you can't make from it a vessel. It's very interesting. It's like he's making a metaphysical statement here, right? All vessels, all use for a thing comes about through a certain complexity. Philosophically speaking, our old friend Aristotle, now is our best friend, right? We speak about him every year. Our old friend Aristotle would call this the form of the thing, right? A simple block is not really useful for anything. I mean, you can sit on it, but not everything you sit on becomes a chair, right? You can sit on anything that's solid and square. That doesn't make it a chair, right? To make it a chair, to make something a kli, right? And it's even really in halacha, because, for example, when you put the schach on the sukkah has to be something that was separated from the ground and not made into a vessel, right? So you could sit on a pile of those bamboo sticks that you use for the sukkah. That doesn't make it a vessel just to have sat on it, right? It has to be worked. It has to be formed to a purpose. By the way, don't apply that halachically. Maybe sitting on it would make you right. Halachically be considered as a chair. I'm not 100% sure. It's a good halachic question. Your mileage may vary that way. But I'm saying that the kli, generally speaking, the general conception of a vessel is something that is used and devoted to a certain purpose. So something which is just a block, you can't really make from it a vessel. Almost everything has to be formed to a certain purpose. The cup has to be made into this shape, right? To work as a cup. When it was just a sheet of styrofoam, it couldn't be a cup. In order to prepare it, that it should be appropriate, that it should work as a vessel, first you have to carve it twice. First you have to carve it from the outside, and then you have to carve it from the inside. Right. So for example, if you're taking you're making a wooden cup from a big chunk of wood, from a tree trunk, right? You have this thing, it's cut out from a tree trunk, it's this big, right? It sits on the table. You want to make a kiddush cup out of wood from this, let's say, right? So first you have to carve it from the outside, right? Because I need to get this down to a certain size, but it's still just a hunk of wood. And then you carve it from the inside, which actually accomplishes the function and gives it the functionality of the cup. So you are basically separating it out into its own piece that's going to be used for a vessel, which is the carving from the outside, right? And then you carve it from the inside to make it into a vessel that can serve its functions. There's two carvings. This is the metaphor. So too in man who is compared to the tree of the field. Through the exaltation of God in their throats, in the praises of Psukei de Zimra, b'chayos v'hispalus, with liveliness and excitation, right? Can't just do it without feeling. You have to bring the Nefesh HaBahamis into an excitement about God and the godliness of all these things. Then you move the animal soul. You're able to shift, move, transport the animal soul to separate from evil, at least temporarily. Right? You can bring the animal soul to a state where it says, the root of all these things is godliness. I'm not going to pursue coarseness and evil anymore. You can even create in it a certain turning towards the good. Which is the general hanacha, the general fixed assumption. You can affix the assumption in the animal soul that godliness is good, that God is what is good for the animal soul. That is the function of the Psukei de Zimra. I believe that he's going to get back to this thing about the wood, if I'm not mistaken. 1 second. Yeah. Okay. So we're going to get back to this thing about the wood. So you file that away, because this whole next paragraph is going to be explaining this. We're going to work up to explaining this metaphor. Does someone have the time?
Yeah, 10 to 9.
Plenty. We have so much time. Let's keep going.
You can finish it tonight.
We can start from the beginning.
All right. Next paragraph. Let's continue. We're still discussing Psukei de Zimra. This next paragraph is also about Psukei de Zimra, right? Which, by the way, at the end of the paragraph, we're going to explain why this is the table, right? If you'll recall, or is it the chair? The table. This is the table, pardon me. The bed there's 4 objects that we placed in the little room that we built for the spirit of godliness. There was the bed, which was the reckoning of Kriyat Shema. And then there is the table. The table is Psukei de Zimra, if I'm not mistaken. So, Psukei de Zimra and Birchas Kriyat Shema is the table. Shema is the chair. And the lamp is the Shemona Esrei. Those are the different levels. So we're still explaining the table. Why we haven't even got around to asking why the table, right? We'll get to that eventually. I'm just reminding you that's what we're discussing. We're in the middle of this whole morning, davening in the morning process. Let's continue. Continues the Friedrich Rebbe, a new paragraph. The animal soul, even though Kishmei Kainhu, as it is named, so it is. We call it the animal soul. Why? Because it is animalistic and natural. It follows its nature, and its essence is midos, is emotion. Nevertheless, the animal soul has an incredible advantage, right? We are now going to answer the question in the opposite direction, right? The first question we answer tonight is, why don't we just speak to the animal soul? And the answer is because the animal soul does not have the ability to transcend its own self-centeredness, even in its mind, right? That's why we need the godly soul. So then you could ask the question in the opposite direction. I should just talk to the godly soul who needs that thing, right? Who needs the animal soul. And the truth is that we would need the animal soul even regardless of what we're about to say, because God commands us to make a dwelling place in the lower world. So we'd have to bring the animal soul on board. But the Friedrich Rebbe is going to go do us one better. And he's going to explain how not only do we need the animal soul, but the animal soul in its way actually contributes and makes this marriage. It brings something to the marriage that even the godly soul doesn't have. It contributes something of its own.
So question.
Yeah.
If we read it and we enjoy it, is it that Nefesh B'mit is enjoying that or Nefesh Elokit?
Oh, it's a very good story. Very good, very good, very good question. I think that's a good one to ask Rabbi Silverman. I don't know the answer to that question.
No,
it's a very good
answer
question.
which I
I
don't
know
like.
the answer. Nefesh B'mit.
Nefesh B'mit?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense.
I don't know.
It's terrible.
I don't know. I'm not
Because, I mean,
sure.
you're reading.
If im ata nehene, זה נפש בהמית.
I don't know. I'm not so sure.
But
I
it's
wouldn't
the
be so
whole thing. I mean, otherwise,
categorical.
what do you even study?
When you breathe, you do the right thing?
I do that.
When you breathe, you do the right thing?
It's a must. It's not a matter of right thing or wrong.
So that's it, when you understand that this is a must.
I don't
It has
know.
nothing to do with
I don't know.
enjoyment.
I've studied more Maimorim than Ronnie, and I don't know. I'm not sure.
I hope it's not.
See, the less you study, the more you know.
That's how it works. That's how it works. I'm actually full of regret. It's very
The other way
true.
around. The more you study, the less you know.
You're making me question all my choices. Nevertheless, the animal soul has a huge quality, has a huge advantage. And its advantage is that it is how do you say olo lehispal? Like it's not able, it's likely, yeah. Olo lehispal, like it's likely, what? Might, yeah. It might get excited. That's the advantage of the animal soul. The animal soul might get excited, worked up. What do we mean? The teva ha'ilulis lehispalel hu maila gedela, that the ability to, or this possibility for getting excited is a great quality, says the Chassidic Rebbes. Like we see with our own eyes in the nature of human beings. There are some people who by nature are cold, and it is their nature not to get excited. Right? There are some people who are emotionally cold. It's very hard for them to get emotional. And it's not an intellectual coldness, rather that is simply their nature. What does he mean? This is going to be a very interesting. I just want to read, and then we'll discuss more at the end. That even though it's true that in general the difference between intellect and emotion is that the intellect is mesinus ve'yashvus, it is deliberate and calm. That's the nature of the intellect. And emotional traits are excited and feeling, sensitive and excited. So, in other words, as I said before, this is really just a different way of saying what I was saying before, by the way. That when we say the emotion is the main thing, we mean it's all about relation, right? Emotions mean I am moved by my surroundings. That's literally what it means. I am either moving towards or moving away. That's love and fear, right? Emotion is all about reactivity. It's a reactive thing. It's me and how I relate to other things. That's what the emotion is, which is why the animal soul being emotion-centric makes it existentially self-centered, right? Because it's all about my emotions, my relations with other things. The intellect, by nature, is the opposite. The intellect looks at things with coldness and objectivity. That's the distinguishing quality of the intellect. Now, of course, the emotions have the ability to be somewhat cold, right? You can be emotionally ambivalent, and you could also be intellectually excited to some extent. And Chassidus talks about all these gradations in quite fine detail. It's quite complicated, but nevertheless, the essential nature of the two. In other words, there is a bit of a spectrum in some sense, but the essence of each side is that the intellect is cold, deliberative, right, and objective, because the whole idea of the intellect is here, the essence of the intellect is here is the idea exactly as it is, right? I'm not even involved. Here is the idea, right? I'm thinking about the Pythagorean theorem. The Pythagorean theorem is in my mind. Here's the Pythagorean theorem. It's not, do I like the Pythagorean theorem the way I like pizza, right? Students of math in high school ask this question too often. That's why the grades go down. The emotions, the exact opposite. There's no emotion for what is this thing objectively. There's no such thing. Emotions are, how do I feel about it? What's my relationship with the thing? Yes? So the intellect is naturally cold, unexcited, right? Not moved and reactive towards things. The intellect is a calm and dispassionate vessel for things, for ideas. The emotions are, by nature, excited, excitable, warm, and involved. It's all about relation. It's all relational, right? Yes. Visceral. That's a good way of putting it. Okay. Hine Now, what the Chassidic Rebbe is going to make a distinction. However, deliberation and calmness of the intellect is not true coldness. He is distinguishing between coldness, what he's calling coldness in this mimer, and the state of the intellect. When we say the intellect is dispassionate, we don't mean it's cold in the sense that the Chassidic Rebbe is talking about. He's making a distinction between the two. Ulazais, therefore, therefore, the general idea of coldness is not from the intellect. Rather, that is simply the person's nature and his habit not to get excited. So, we are making a distinction. There's two types of dispassion, right? There's one that the Chassidic Rebbe is talking about. There's the one that the Chassidic Rebbe is not talking about. There's a certain dispassion which comes from the intellect, that a really intellectual person is not as emotionally excitable because the intellect is not emotional. The intellect is dispassionate, deliberative, and calm. That's the nature of the intellect. And a really intellectual person, that intellect can even affect their emotions, and that becomes their nature. They're an intellectual person, and they're dispassionate. That's not what the Chassidic Rebbe is talking about. Dispassionate is one thing, right? But then there's coldness. And coldness here has a much more sinister tone to it. Coldness is much more negative than being dispassionate and deliberative, right? Which are very good traits of the intellect, right? Coldness is like, when we say coldness, you should think coldness bordering on cruelty, sociopathy even maybe, right? I don't want to get too, everything nowadays is a what's it called? Everything nowadays is a diagnosis, so I don't want to get too diagnostical, but the really, really a bad type of coldness. What's the proof? Well, let's read on. The al-harev, the majority of people who are cold like this, ba mitzad hayeshus va'avas atzmai. It comes from their self-centeredness and their self-love.
Narcissism.
The yesh misha tivay cham. So in other words, what he's actually describing is an emotional coldness, not an intellectual coldness, right? It's an emotional coldness. It is myself, because of my self-centeredness, because of my need for self-preservation or some other deep need of myself. Therefore, I am cold and not excited easily, right? I'm blocked off from emotions and becoming excited, which is not a good thing, right? If everything is functioning correctly, the mind is cold and dispassionate, the emotions are hot and warm and very passionate. Right? That's everything functioning correctly. The Chassidic Rebbe is describing someone who they're cold, but not because their intellect rules over them. They're cold just because their heart is insensitive. They're dull. Right? How does this dullness come about? The heart is supposed to be so relational. It's supposed to be so open to other things. How does this come about? It's all from a sense of self. It's really an ego thing. The ego makes the person cold because
I don't necessarily think that an ego would necessarily make you cold.
No, not necessarily. But he's saying that in certain, most people who are cold, however, it's like squares and rectangles, right? Not necessarily does the ego make you cold, but most people who are cold, it's an ego issue. That's what he's saying. Most people who are cold, at least in this way that he's describing, it's an ego issue.
Very often it's just a massive defense problem.
Yeah, fine, fair enough. If we're going to get diagnostical, let's get diagnostical. Why? But what is the function of all those defense things according to all the mumchim in psychology, which I am not and would never want to be, but according to all the people who know these things, what is the defense mechanism? The defense mechanism is a self-preservation exercise, right? Because I'm so aware of self, because I so want myself protected from all the things around me, so I emotionally shut myself off, right? Sounds, I don't know, that sounds, I've read enough of those blog posts. Sounds legit, right? And it sounds convincing. Something like that. The openness of this, in Chassidus, openness to experience, a different word for which is simcha, by the way, joy, openness of the heart, openness to the souls of things, which is really what joy is in Chassidus. That openness always comes with a sense of self-abnegation. Chassidic joy comes from a lack of feeling of self. As soon as the person feels themselves, sadness, depression, lethargy, no feelings, right? All joy, the Chassidic joy, openness to other things, is all about self-abnegation. The way the Rebbe Rashab puts it in one of his Maimarim, Chaye Sara Ateres, I believe is the Maimar he discusses it. The Rebbe Rashab there says that really what he's discussing there, I guess we'll have to finish with this because there's probably no more time after I finish this idea. The essence of, really we should learn the Maimar. No, we won't. I won't put you through that. The feeling, the sense of sadness, right? He says joy, he says something very counterintuitive. He says that joy and Kabbalah's ol go together, right? Kabbalah's ol means acceptance of the yoke. The simple translation of Kabbalah's ol into plain English means I'm willing to do things that I don't actually want to do right now, right? It's a form of discipline, Kabbalah's ol. Kabbalah's ol means I'm doing this just because God wants me to, not because I appreciate it, right? At some level. Right? I'm doing this because God wants it to happen, not because I appreciate what it is. Yeah? It's the basis of all service of God, right? That's the most basic level. That's what you're supposed to start with and build on. The first level is supposed to be, I do this because God says so. Then you work to understand, appreciate, etc., etc. The Rebbe Rashab says that doing things because God says so and joy they go together. In fact, they may even in some sense be the same thing. In some deep way, right? How can these two things go together? It's doing what I don't want to do and being joyous. How can those two things go together? And the Rebbe Rashab explains that it's quite simple. God, by giving you commandments, gives you the opportunity to do something that does not originate in yourself, right? Which is a very, very rare thing in life, right? He gives you a commandment and you can do it. And you can do it simply because God asked you to do it. It has no origin in you yourself. I myself would never think to wrap tefillin this morning. That's not on my agenda. I find this whole thing weird. What's with the leather and the straps? The whole thing doesn't speak to me, right? The whole opportunity to do this thing came from God, right? God gives me the opportunity to do something, to perform an action that is not rooted in myself. And by performing an action that is not rooted in myself, I am actually set free. That is a great form of freedom, counterintuitively, right? Counterintuitively, that is the greatest form of freedom because the ultimate constraint on myself is my ego, is the fact that everything I do originates in me. And I'm finite and corrupted and, God forbid, a sinner and all these other things I've done and all these imperfections. And no matter what I do, right? If it's based on me, its origin is in that finitude, that corruption, that imperfection, right? God gives me a command, and I can do something that actually has nothing to do with me, right? And that, says the Rebbe Rashab, that's joy. Joy is, if you really realize what it is you're doing there, right? You are able to totally escape yourself. What happens when you totally escape your sense of self? You stop thinking that you deserve things, right? You start being grateful because my actions are not originating in myself, right? I am not I'm not the topic of discussion here. What goes on in my life can have something not to do with me, right? That is when you start thinking that way, that I have a time in my day where what God wants is what happens, and I'm just a pass-through. I'm just a conduit, right? God wants tefillin laid on a Jewish arm, and I just happen to have one of those, and I can do it for him, right? And I'm just the way means for that to pass through. You stop expecting things for yourself, and you become totally opened up because there is no, it's not that everything around me and everything in my life has to be manipulated for my benefit, right? It's not, what do I deserve? Am I having a good day? Am I having a bad day? It's just totally not about me.
But yet you want to do it.
What is?
You're doing it for God. It's like you're doing it because you want that benefit.
No, that you have to. No, on the contrary, that's why you can always find in Judaism, I promise, something to do that you don't appreciate. It's not so. I wouldn't worry about that. I can find you something to do that you would not appreciate, and you would not want to do it for any
No, it's
for
not a
any
matter of
benefit.
appreciation, but it's a matter of you enjoy it. If you wouldn't enjoy it, you wouldn't do it.
The question is whether there's an intersection between doing something because you're commanded to do it,
Yeah,
and then you do it,
yeah,
and you feel good about it.
Absolutely. It's related. You know why? And that's the whole thing about Judaism. First you do it, then you turn to like it.
yes.
No, then
The
you turn to like it.
appreciation always has to be based on that acceptance of the yoke. Otherwise, the appreciation breaks off and is ruined, and you're 100% right. It becomes corrupted and just another extension of self. That's why, as the Alter Rebbe writes in Tanya, at the beginning of chapter 41, the beginning of all Aveda is Kabbalah Soul. God is watching. God has set aside all the upper worlds and all the lower worlds, and He's come down this morning in this synagogue, and He's waiting right here, looking at me. Are you going to do the mitzvah? That's the foundation of all mitzvahs. And that foundation has to be constantly present. And the truth is that all the Maimarim about joy and all the Maimarim about love, two things which are connected, all of those Maimarim talk about the danger inherent in these things. These things are you're playing with fire. It's vitally important to be joyous and to have love, but if they break away even an inch from that foundation of bittul, of sense of self-negation, then they become a yesh, they become something, they become a just another barrier between you and God. You have to have this balance. That's why all the Maimarim about joy also talk about fear and how the two things in Judaism have to come together. You have to have what's called gilu birada, which means celebrate, dance in trembling or something like that.
It's like fear God.
אהבה ויראה, זה הולך תרי גדפין. שני כנפיים, אי אפשר לעוף עם כנף אחת.
What time is it? Someone have the time?
So to mix a metaphor,
Okay, 1 second.
in order for the
Yeah.
light bulb to go off in the animal soul, you first have to flip the switch in the godly
No,
soul.
connected to higher power.
The godly soul switch is always flipped, right? You have to bring them together. Is really what you have to.
No, I think you have the right solution. If the bulb is like for 110, put 220, blow it, and that's it.
No, you need the bulb.
Why?
That's the innovation of the Alter Rebbe.
Come on, get LED.
The innovation of the Alter Rebbe is that you need the bulb, which is the most most frustrating thing.
That's old-fashioned already.
It's the most frustrating
Now
thing.
we're talking about LEDs. Forget about the
If you
bulb.
don't have that little bit of, if you don't have that last Chabad twist at the end where the Alter Rebbe says you need the bulb, you can't just blow it. You have to use it. You have to keep that stupid bulb, and you have to make that bulb light. And even if you only get one glimmer in 100 years, maybe that's what you were created for. Without that, it's all useless, right? You can go blowing bulbs all day. You can blow bulbs by taking drugs too. It's not. There's no chiddush.
Like
It's
Edison.
using the bulb. You have to use the bulb. Get that glimmer of light out of it. That's the key. That's the whole thing. All right. Let me find just a place in here to stop. Just 1 second. You know what? Fine. We'll stop here. We'll continue this. We're kind of in the middle of something, but it's unavoidable. We can't keep going and we can't go back. So we will spend the week in the middle of this sentence. God willing. We'll continue next week.
So here's a question.